On this episode of TJ's Reef, we're going to go over the top 10 things you can do to be successful in reefing. Stay tuned. Hey there everyone, thanks for joining us today, and we are going to go over what I feel are the top 10 things a new reefer or any reefer can do to be successful in this hobby. Now, these are my opinions, but I think if you do a little bit of research, you will find that these are pretty well agreed upon items. The list is in no particular order, so here we go. And the first thing I'm going to say you need to do for the reef keeping hobby to be successful is you need to be patient. I can't stress that one enough. Patience is key. From the moment you start setting up, or I should say even from the moment you start to decide to set up a reef tank, regardless of the type of tank you're going to do, patience. Patience while deciding what equipment you're going to need, patience in deciding your lighting and your placement of your tank and the rocks you're going to put in it and how you're going to do it, all the way through the cycle. That's where your patience is really tested for the first time. To when you get those first fish in there, to when your tank is finally mature enough to have corals or whatever else you're going to keep in that tank. Patience is the key to success. Now, moving on to number 2 is kind of hand in hand with patience, and that's don't keep fiddling with your tank. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, when you notice maybe something isn't right, let's say a coral isn't doing that great, don't keep changing things every single day or multiple times in a single day. I've seen countless people in various reef forums or on Facebook talk about, hey, my fill in the blank type of coral isn't doing great, so I tested all these things, and so I raised alkalinity and I raised my pH and then I changed my lighting schedule and I did this, and then a day later it's, hey, it's still not doing well, so I lowered my salinity and then I checked my calcium and then I raised it higher in the tank. Then 3 days later it's, oh, now I lowered it in the tank and I changed my light. You can't do that. You really gotta kind of keep things stable and then, change one thing and let it sit for a while before you decide to change something else if it's not taking care of the problem that you're trying to fix. A great thing to do is, change the one thing that you feel would make the most impact. So if a coral is browning out, it might not be getting enough light. So, make a choice. Do you move it higher in the tank? If you know what your PAR readings are, moving it higher to give it more light, or is it because you notice you have low nutrients? And the PAR is good for that type of coral. Just pick one of those and then let it sit for, a couple of weeks and see what happens. If it's getting worse, all right, maybe now you need to take some other action. That wasn't the fix, so then pick another one thing. So don't keep fiddling with a bunch of things all at once. Number 3 is going to be using good water from the get-go, and that means getting yourself a good RODI system. Now, a lot of people like to use RODI from their fish store, which is great. I'm all about supporting your local small business and your local fish stores, but make sure that their water is testing at 0 TDS. Make sure it doesn't have any phosphates in it and everything. But I still think cost-effective wise, you're better off getting your own RODI system. And don't go cheap here because it'll end up costing you even more in the long run. So spend a little bit of money up front. The ones where you can refill them yourselves are better in the long run because it ends up being cheaper over the long term to refill your own canisters. And, don't get ones that you have to only use their specific size or type of filter. Get more the universal style. The one I'm currently using is from Bulk Reef Supply. I'm not getting anything off of saying, I'm not getting paid to say I really enjoyed their setup, but it's been great. I have a triple TDS meter on it, and I know I'm getting 0 TDS, and it's being filtered really well, especially since I have really bad city water. So I want to make sure I get everything, especially the chlorine, out of there. So get yourself an RODI water, and that's one less thing you have to worry about down the road. Number 4 on the list kind of goes hand in hand with number 2 of not fiddling, which is stability. Whatever your numbers are, if everything seems to be working for you, then just keep them there. Don't go chasing 8.4 pH because that's what everyone else says, and yours is holding just fine at 8.2 or 8.25 or whatever it may be. If you keep it at that level and your corals and your fish and everything in your tank is doing well, then who cares what other people are running at? If you're successful at the numbers and the parameters you're holding consistently, week in, week out, month in, month out, then you're fine. You're doing great. I have seen people post amazing tanks with parameters so far removed from what we would consider normal that it proves that you can do this in a wide range of things as long as you keep them stable. And you take the time to acclimate your inhabitants to those levels. So keep things stable. All right, moving on to number 5. And number 5 and number 6 kind of go hand in hand, but they are separate. So number 5 is dip every coral that goes into your tank. I don't care if it came from a friend's house. I don't care if it came from a trusted local fish store, local coral vendor. I don't care if you bought it online. Dip everything. I have learned the hard way, and I don't want you to learn the hard way. I had gotten flatworms in one of my tanks. Now, thankfully, they were the brown flatworms and not the really bad red ones that I was able to eradicate very easy, didn't lose a single thing, but it could have been really bad. I just recently got some coral from a fish store, dipped it. There were things in there I wasn't able to figure out what they were, so I am glad I did take the time to dip it, and I will continue to dip all my corals moving forward. Which leads us to number 6, which is QT everything you buy that's not a coral. I am speaking to you from a place of learning. Basically I went 20 plus years without ever quarantining anything and never had any problems, and then I had a problem. And after going through that, I will now make sure that I quarantine everything from snails to fish. I have a QT system set up now. It's a small 20-gallon setup that I just leave up, and all of my fish will go in there for quarantine period and treatment, so they'll all be treated with copper and antibacterials and things like that for any parasites or diseases. Once I'm able to verify that they are healthy, then they will go into the display tanks. I'm just going to leave it up and running full time because I never know when I'm going to need it, and it's really not that hard to keep up and running. What I don't have set up is a very small tank for inverts. Obviously, I can't quarantine inverts in the same tank as the fish because of the copper treatment. So what I plan to do with them is put them in there for, I think it's about 90 days. Don't quote me on that number, but it's the fallow period for any fish-borne diseases that could be in them or on their shells or whatever, be carried over in the water that they've been in, to go fallow, and those organisms would die. So without a fish host, they die off and are no longer a threat. All right, number 7. This isn't like a huge one, but it's definitely one that people should be aware of, which is, picking the salt that's best for you. And specifically, pick a salt mix that is close to the parameters for the tank you want to keep. A lot of people pick salt based on cost, or they see it's the quote best salt out there. I don't know if I put a whole lot of faith in that. You know, some salts are definitely better than others. You know, there's some salts that are better if you want to keep them pre-mixed for long periods of time, and there's salts that, you know, you got to mix them and use them within a couple hours, otherwise they're going to start to drop stuff in the bottom of your bucket and precipitate out. But outside of those things, just get one that has stability in the parameter ranges that you're looking for. It's really not that hard. So there's nothing wrong with using Instant Ocean. It gets bashed all the time. It's perfectly fine. You can use Red Sea. You can use Tropic Marin. You know, use whatever works for you. And if you're successful, just stick with it. Number 8 is one that I see all the time where people have regrets, and that is research before you purchase. Now, usually this goes along with fish, but it can also go along with your inverts and even corals. If you don't know what you're putting in your tank, you don't know what to expect on how it's going to interact with your other tank inhabitants, and what it might eat, what it might not eat, how big it's going to get, the conditions it needs to be kept in, a whole litany of things that you need to know and research before you buy and decide to care for this animal and all the other animals that you have in your tank. You have the internet at your fingertips. You can even research in the fish store. So do your homework. Make sure that the animal you're going to purchase and bring home is compatible with other tank inhabitants. Make sure it's going to be a long-term thing and not something you have to get rid of in maybe a week or two. You know, just take your hobby seriously and don't put any of the animals in harm's way unnecessarily. All right, we're almost at the end. Number 9, test your parameters. You know, a lot of times in the forums, I'll see someone say that, oh, I'm having this problem. And people say, what are your parameters? And they'll say, oh, they're all fine. Well, fine doesn't tell me anything. And then we'll say, well, what's your salinity? And they'll say, oh, let me go check. How do you not know what your salinity is at any given time? You should be testing on a somewhat regular basis. Now, you don't have to do it every day. Once a week might be great. There's a lot of factors that will play into how frequently you need to test and what you should be testing for, but you do need to test to make sure things are staying stable. You know, you may be perfectly stable for the longest time, and then all of a sudden you realize, uh-oh, my calcium's dropped off, or my alkalinity is starting to drop off. Why? Because your corals are now getting bigger, they're growing faster, they're going to start consuming these things faster than you ever had to deal with before, and now you need to start dosing, or maybe up your dosing. If you don't do your testing, you're never going to know these things. So make sure you test on a fairly consistent basis. And here we are at number 10. Last but not least, plan for a disaster. Now, I don't mean you're going to have a disaster, but I'm saying have a plan in place for when a disaster happens. The last thing you want to do is have an emergency on your hands and not be prepared to deal with it. So what do I mean by planning for this disaster? Well, you should have plenty of salt on hand at all times. I have a bag of salt that I do not consider part of my stock. I keep it in my cabinet, and it is there as an emergency backup. Another one is having water in backup. Never run yourself dry. You should always have water, RODI water, available to make that salt or make top off water or whatever you need to do. Make sure you always have water. Have backup filters for your RODI. Have treatment medications, so copper and what have you, available at all times. Have a quarantine setup, or at least a spare tank and heater and pump available. Have an air stone and an air pump available. Don't get rid of old equipment. I suggest keeping it so you can use it for these quarantine setups or disaster recovery plans. Have some cheap stuff on standby. Your basic little power heads, your basic air pumps, any of those types of things are great to have around all the time just for a backup plan. I hope you found these top 10 tips helpful in you having a successful reef keeping tank. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them down in the comments below. Before you leave, I would really appreciate if you subscribed, and then make sure you hit the little bell icon so that you will get notified when new episodes of TJ's Reef is available. Until next time, happy reefing.